frost still clung to the sage when the first gold light slid across the empty valley. A lone horse approached the log trading post. No smoke, no sound. The door hung wide open in the wind. He tied the reins, pushed the door. The copper smell hit before his eyes adjusted. Shelves overturned. Flour dusted the floor like dirty snow. In the middle of the wreckage, a body face down in a pool gone black at the edges. From the back room, ragged breathing, wet, broken, he kicked the door. Light cut through the dark. A woman slumped against the wall. One eye swollen shut, and on her shoulder, a raw, weeping wound, a circle crossed by two jagged lines. The mark of something that never warned before it struck. The wind still scraped the hills, as if searching. Inside, her voice was barely a breath. "They'll come back." He holstered the revolver, drew his knife. The frost hadn't burned off the sage, yet when Sterling Ashworth rode out from Larkspur, before dawn, alone, the way he liked it now, because that was the thing about being the richest man in 3 valleys, people assumed you never wanted to be by yourself. They assumed wrong. Sterling had learned, these last 3 years, that solitude was the only company that didn't ask him questions he couldn't answer. 18,000 acres of grazing land, streams that ran clear through August, freight contracts stretching from his front gate to the territorial depot 200 miles east. Money in railways, money in timber, his name on deeds for land he'd never once set foot on. At 42, Sterling Ashworth was the kind of wealthy that didn't need to announce itself. People just knew. But wealth was a strange animal out here on the frontier. It bought comfort. Sometimes it bought protection. It bought a certain kind of respect from men who measured a man's worth in cattle and coin. It did not buy peace. He'd learned that the hard way. Learned it 3 years ago in a ravine 6 miles from his own front porch when they'd carried his wife home wrapped in a horse blanket and told him it was an accident. He didn't think about that. Not this morning. This morning he had an errand, a rifle he'd commissioned 2 months back from Abner Farr, out at the trading post, where the road split toward the mining camps. Silver inlay, his initials on the stock. The kind of thing a rich man bought when he had money to burn and nothing left worth spending it on. Routine business, the kind of errand his foreman could have handled. But Sterling liked the ride, liked the silence, liked that out here with nothing but hoofbeats and wind. Nobody expected him to be anything other than a man on a horse. The post came into view just as the light turned gold. Single story, log walls, a roof patched with tar paper that Abner kept meaning to replace and never did. Corral out front, empty. Sterling frowned. Abner always had stock in that corral. Always had smoke curling up from that chimney this time of morning, because the old man liked his coffee scalding and his biscuits burnt. No smoke. He reined in at the rail, sat there a moment, listening. Nothing. No creak of the door. No clatter of pans. No sound at all except wind scraping over the hills like it was looking for something too. He tied off his horse, walked to the door, unlocked. That was the first wrong thing. Abner locked up every night. Had, ever since Drifters cleaned out half his shelves 2 winters back. The old man was many things, stubborn, cheap with his whiskey, prone to cheating at cards, but careless was never one of them. Sterling pushed the door open. Abner! The smell hit him before his eyes adjusted. Copper. And under it something worse. Something that made his stomach drop, before his mind had even caught up to what it was smelling. His hand found his revolver on its own. Didn't wait for permission. The store had been torn apart. Shelves overturned. Flour dusted across the floor like dirty snow. Sacks split open, spilling grain into the wreckage. And in the middle of it all, face down, in a pool gone black at the edges, Abner Farr. Sterling crossed the room slow, boots crunching over broken glass. He didn't need to check for a pulse. He could see that from 6 feet away. What had been done to Abner's throat wasn't the kind of thing a man walked away from. His hands were curled up tight, fingers bent wrong, Whoever did this had wanted him to suffer first. Christ, Sterling said low to no one. His stomach turned. He didn't look away, though. You didn't survive out here being squeamish. You learned to look at the worst thing in the room and keep breathing anyway. Then he heard it. A sound. From the back. Faint. Could have been the wind, rattling a loose board somewhere. Except it wasn't wind. It was breathing. Ragged. Wet at the edges. The kind of breathing that came from a body that had been hurt in more places than it could keep track of. Sterling's grip tightened on the revolver. He crossed to the storeroom door, Abner's back room, where he kept the good whiskey and the ledgers he didn't want customers seeing. Locked, but the wood around the latch had splintered, like something had been forced shut from the outside. Forced, not forced open, which meant somebody had wanted whatever was in there to stay in there. Anyone in there? The breathing stopped. Then a voice, barely more than a breath itself. Stay away. A woman. Sterling holstered the gun. Pulled his knife instead. 3 kicks and the door gave, hinges tearing loose from wood gone soft with age. Dark inside. One high window, letting in a blade of light. The air thick with blood and something else underneath it. Something scorched. Took his eyes a moment to adjust. He almost wished they hadn't. She was slumped against the far wall, half hidden behind crates of ammunition. Young, maybe mid-20s. What used to be a riding outfit, now hanging off her in rags. One eye swollen shut, lips split and crusted dark. But it was her shoulder that stopped his breath. Somebody had branded her. The wound still raw, still weeping. A circle crossed through with 2 jagged lines the mark drovers called the Copperhead. Because a copperhead doesn't rattle a warning first. It just strikes. Sterling had seen that mark before. On a manifest. On the side of a crate he'd never asked too many questions about. He'd seen it and looked away the way a man looks away from something he doesn't want to understand yet. He understood it now. Don't, the woman said, trying to push herself up and failing. Don't. They'll come back. Sterling knelt beside her slow. Close enough now to see the rest of it. Rope burns at her wrists, bruises ringing her throat, boot-shaped marks along her ribs. This hadn't been quick. They'd taken their time. They're gone, he said, kept his voice low, steady, the way you'd talk to a spooked horse. It's just me. Name's Sterling Ashworth. I'm gonna get you out of here. She stared at him with the one eye that still worked. For a second he thought she might fight him. Claw bite whatever she had left. Then something in her face just broke, crumpled inward like a held breath finally let go. She nodded. Once. Ren, she whispered. My name's Ren Callaway. Getting her onto his horse took longer than it should have. She was too thin, too light in a way that made his jaw tighten every time he lifted her, because a person wasn't supposed to weigh this little. Every movement pulled a gasp out of her. She tried, and failed to swallow. Broken ribs, he guessed. Maybe worse. He didn't take her into Millhaven. Couldn't. The doctor there was fine, competent, sober most days, but Millhaven belonged to Marshal Duke Halloran, and Marshal Duke Halloran belonged to whoever paid him last. Taking Ren into that town would be like walking her straight back to whoever did this, and handing her over with a bow on top. So he turned north. Toward Larkspur, toward Agnes Doyle, who'd nursed men, through worse during the war, and never once asked a question she didn't need the answer to. The ride took most of the morning. Ren didn't speak, just gripped the saddle horn white-knuckled, and breathed through her teeth like each breath cost her something she didn't have to spare. Twice she went slack against him, and he had to stop, heart hammering, to check she was still breathing. She was, barely, but she was. By the time Larkspur came into view, stone house, barns in neat rows, more horses in the corrals than most towns had people. The sun was high, and Sterling barely noticed any of it anymore. He rode straight for the main house and shouted for Agnes before his boots hit the ground. She came at a run, wiping flour off her hands onto her apron, and stopped dead the second she saw what he was carrying. Lord above, Agnes breathed. What happened to her? Copperhead Ring, Sterling said. He caught Ren as she started to slide, careful as glass. Get the guest room ready. Nobody else finds out about this. Not the hands. Not the foreman. Nobody. Agnes's face went hard, and still, the way it did, when she decided something was going to be handled, and there'd be no further discussion about it. Bring her inside, she said. Ren woke to clean sheets and the smell of carbolic soap. For one soft, merciful second, she didn't remember anything at all. Then it came back. All of it. The saloon. Wade Thorne's hands. The riders in dusters. Levi's voice. Cracking. Then screaming. Then, she tried to sit up. Regretted it instantly. Don't, said a voice. Calm. Firm. A woman sat in a chair by the bed, lamplight carving deep lines into her face. Older. Gray at the temples. Eyes that had clearly seen enough ugliness in this life that very little surprised them anymore. You're safe, the woman said. Name's Agnes. You're at Larkspur Ranch. Mr. Ashworth brought you here 2 days ago. 2 days. Ren's throat felt like sand. Where is he? Downstairs. He'll want to know you're awake. Agnes set aside a bowl of water and a cloth, leaned in. First I need to look at that brand. It's infected. Been cleaning it, but it needs watching. Ren looked down. Someone had bandaged her shoulder tight and neat. The pain was still there, of course it was still there, it would always be there now, but dulled. Pushed back behind a wall of laudanum. The man who brought me here, Ren said slowly. Sterling Ashworth. You don't know who that is? Should I? Agnes's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. He's the richest man in 3 valleys. Owns more land than some states have. If you'd asked me a week ago whether Sterling Ashworth would risk his neck hauling a stranger out of a bloodbath, I'd have told you that you were dreaming. She stood, smoothed her skirts. But here we are. I'll fetch him. She left before Ren could ask anything else. Ren lay back, stared at the ceiling. The room was fine, too fine. Flowered wallpaper, oil paintings, a rug that probably cost more than her family's farm ever had. Back when there was a farm, back when there was a family. The kind of room people like her didn't belong in. Footsteps on the stairs. Then the door opened, and Sterling Ashworth walked in. He looked different than she remembered. Cleaner, for one thing. Somebody had clearly made him wash the blood off, after carrying her half-dead across half the territory. Tall, broad through the shoulders, dark hair going gray at the temples in a way that suggested it hadn't happened gradually, that something had gone gray all at once 3 years ago and just never came back. His face would have been handsome if it wasn't held so carefully blank. Miss Callaway. His voice was the same as she remembered. Low, steady. A voice that didn't waste words because it had learned the hard way that words could be wasted on people who didn't deserve them. How are you feeling? Ren almost laughed. Came out as a cough instead. Like I got dragged behind a horse for 10 miles. A pause. Which, I suppose I was. Thank you. Sterling pulled the chair closer. Saturday. You don't need to thank me. Any decent person would have done the same. No, Ren said. They wouldn't have. Not when the Copperhead Ring's involved. Something flickered across his face. Gone before she could name it. Tell me what happened, he said. So she did. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. How she'd been traveling with her brother, heading for the mining camps, because he'd heard there was work. How they'd stopped in Millhaven for supplies. How that had been the mistake. Crossing paths with Wade Thorne in a saloon. Wade Thorne getting handsy, Wade Thorne smiling, when Levi shoved him off her. I'll remember that, Wade had said, smiling the whole time. He had. 3 nights later, riders came into their camp in the dark. Dragged Levi off his bedroll. Beat him until he couldn't stand. Then took him. Ren tried to follow. Tried to fight. Woke up in chains in a basement that smelled like old blood and older fear. They kept me down there 2 weeks, Ren said. Her voice had gone flat. Mechanical. The voice of someone reciting facts, because feeling them again wasn't survivable twice. Silas Crane. He's their enforcer. Wanted to break me, make me compliant. That's the word he used. Compliant. She touched the bandage at her shoulder. This was supposed to remind me who I belonged to. Sterling's face had gone very still. And your brother? Ren closed her good eye. They killed him. Slow. On purpose. Ezra Thorne, Wade's older brother, he runs the whole operation, he made me watch. Said it was a lesson. The room went quiet. Just the tick of a clock somewhere down the hall. Counting seconds neither of them wanted. Why'd they leave you alive? Sterling asked finally. I don't know. Ren opened her eyes. Maybe they got bored. Maybe they figured I'd run, and hunting me down later would be more fun than killing me now. A breath. Or maybe they just wanted me to keep suffering. Longer than my brother got to. She said it without flinching. That was the part that unsettled him most. Not the words. The absence of anything behind them. Sterling stood. Walked to the window. Stood there a long moment looking out at his land, his empire, all that money, and power spread out under an indifferent sky. None of it worth a single damn thing right now. The Copperhead Ring, he said quiet, has been running this territory for 8 years. Started small. Claim jumping. Protection money. The usual outlaw business. He turned back to face her. Then they got smart. Started buying people. Lawmen. Judges. Freight men. Now they move human beings like cattle and nobody can touch them, because half this territory answers to them, before it answers to God. Ren stared at him. I've been trying to bring them down for 3 years, he said. Ever since they killed my wife. Something in Ren's chest went very still. Your wife. Charlotte. His voice didn't change, but his hands at his sides, curled into fists he didn't seem to notice making. She ran a shelter, helped women who'd been trafficked get somewhere safe. She found a route the ring was using, freight cars disguised as livestock shipments. Brought the evidence to Marshal Halloran. Thought he'd help her. His jaw tightened. He went straight to Ezra Thorne instead. They found her body 3 days later, he said. In a ravine. Made it look like her horse threw her. I'm sorry, Ren said, and meant it. Sterling shook his head. After she died, I tried everything. Investigators, private detectives, wrote letters to the territorial governor that never got answered. Nothing moved. The ring's roots go too deep. I can buy 100 men, Miss Callaway. I can't buy justice. Not when the whole system's already been bought out from under it. He came back, sat again, leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I didn't just bring you here out of charity, he said. You've been inside their operation. You know their faces, their routines, where they keep people. A pause. That's worth more than everything I own combined. Ren's heart was pounding now. What are you saying? I'm saying I can protect you, give you somewhere to heal, resources, anything you need. He paused again. But in return, I want to burn them down. All of them, and I need your help to do it. Ren looked at him a long moment. This man, his fine house, his imported wallpaper, all that land, all that money, and an empty half of a bed, where a good woman used to sleep. He was offering her a deal. Revenge dressed up as partnership. Smart, also dangerous. The Copperhead Ring didn't forgive, didn't forget. Going after them meant all or nothing. It meant blood. But her hands were already stained. Had been since the moment she picked up that lantern in the tunnel. No, not yet. That hadn't happened yet. That was still coming. Right now, all she had was rage with nowhere to point it. I want Silas Crane dead, she said. And Wade Thorne. And Ezra Thorne most of all. I want them to suffer the way my brother suffered. The way I suffered. Then we're agreed, Sterling said. Not yet. Ren pushed herself upright, ignoring what her ribs had to say about it. I need to know something first. Why do you actually care? You could take your money, go somewhere civilized, somewhere safe. Why stay here and fight a war you can't win? Sterling was quiet a moment. When he spoke, his voice had gone raw in a way it hadn't been before. Because Charlotte asked me to, he said. The night before she died, she came home and said, Sterling, if something happens to me, don't let them win. Don't let them keep doing this. He met Ren's eyes. I promised her I wouldn't. He didn't look away when he said it. I've broken plenty of promises in my life, he said. Not that one. Never that one. Ren nodded, slow. All right, here's the deal then. You give me what I need. Guns, supplies, place to plan. And when the time comes, you don't get in my way. A beat. I'm not your employee. I'm not your weapon. I'm a partner. Equal stakes. Sterling stood, extended his hand. Equal stakes. Ren took it. His grip was firm. Calloused despite the wealth, the grip of a man who'd built something with his own hands before he got rich enough to pay other men to do the building. One more thing, Ren said. I'm going to kill them, not capture. Not hand them over to some marshal on their own payroll. Kill. She held his gaze. If that's a problem for you. It's not, Sterling said. Simply. And just like that, the war began. 3 days after finding Abner Farr's body, Sterling rode back out to the trading post alone. He hadn't told Ren he was going. Hadn't told Agnes either. Some part of him needed to do this piece by himself, the burying, the closing of a door, that had been the first thing to go wrong in a chain of things that hadn't stopped going wrong since. He dug the grave himself. Out back, near the corral under a scrub cedar, that was the closest thing to shade this stretch of ground had to offer. Took him most of the morning. His hands blistered. He didn't stop to bandage them. When it was done, he went back inside to salvage what supplies were left, before the place got picked clean by scavengers or worse. That's when he found it. A floorboard, near where Abner kept his cot, that gave a half-inch more than the others when he stepped on it. Sterling knelt, pried it up with his knife. Tin box, rusted at the corners. Inside, a small ledger, handwritten, Abner's cramped, careful hand, the same hand that used to write up Sterling's rifle orders. Sterling sat back on his heels and read. Payments, small ones at first, then larger, going back 3 years. Marked only with initials E.T. and a running tally beside each entry that Sterling understood before he wanted to. Abner Farr had been paid, for years, to look the other way when certain wagons came through, to keep his mouth shut about certain shipments that didn't quite match their manifests. Sterling's stomach turned, over slow, like something rotting, from the inside. He'd known the old man 20 years. Bought his rifles from him, sat across from him playing cards, complaining about weather, about cattle prices, about nothing at all. And the whole time he kept reading. The last entry was different, rushed, the ink smeared, where a hand had been shaking too hard to write steady. Sent the girl north, told them she run off on her own. God forgive me for the years I didn't do right. Maybe this squares it some. Sterling sat there a long time, ledger in his lap. Cedar shadow crawling slow across the dirt, where Abner Farr now lay, because the old man hadn't been innocent. He'd taken their money, looked away when looking away was easiest. For 3 years he'd let this go on, let wagons pass, through with cargo he must have suspected, must have known on some level a man can't quite lie to himself about forever. And then, when it counted, when a broken girl was bleeding out in his back room, and all he had to do was open the front door, and hand her over, he hadn't. He'd lied. To men who didn't forgive lying. And it had cost him his throat. Sterling closed the ledger. Sat with that a while. Which was worse, he wondered, the years of looking away, or the single moment of finally looking straight at something, and refusing to hand it over. He didn't have an answer. Didn't think there was a clean one. But he took the ledger home anyway. Because somebody ought to know that even a man who'd spent years being paid to be a coward could, in the end, choose to be something else. Even if it only bought him a knife across the throat instead of a bullet. Even if it was the last choice he ever made. Sterling rode back to Larkspur, as the light went long, and gold across the grass, and didn't say a word to anyone about what he'd found. Not yet. Some things needed carrying alone a little longer, before you could put them down in front of somebody else. Ren healed. Slowly. The swelling went down over days that felt like weeks. The bruises turned from black to a sick yellow-green. Agnes kept the brand clean, kept it wrapped, muttered about infection every time she changed the dressing, and every time the wound looked a little less like it might kill her, and a little more like it was just going to be a scar. Permanent one. Ren didn't need Agnes to tell her that. She spent her days in the guest room at first, too weak to do more than sit up and watch dust motes drift through the window light. Then she was walking the hallway, one hand on the wall. Then she was out on the porch, wrapped in a shawl Agnes insisted on, watching ranch hands she wasn't allowed to speak to about who she really was. Sterling had told them she was a cousin, recovering from illness. Nobody questioned it. That was the thing about working for Sterling Ashworth, you learned early not to ask more than he offered. In the evenings, after Agnes had gone home to her own small house down by the creek, Sterling would sometimes find Ren in the study, not doing anything in particular, just standing there looking at the walls. One wall held books, real ones, leather-bound, the kind most folks out here never saw in their whole lives. Another wall was covered in maps, freight routes, water rights, mining claims, penciled notes in a hand Ren hadn't asked about yet. The third wall held one photograph, silver frame, a woman, dark hair, kind eyes, wearing a dress that had probably cost more than Ren's whole family used to earn in a year. Charlotte, the wife, the promise. Tell me about her, Ren said one evening. Sterling had come in with 2 glasses and a bottle he didn't pour from yet. What do you want to know? Not the version everybody tells. The real one. Sterling was quiet a moment. Maybe it was easier, he thought, to talk about the dead, when you weren't sure how many days you had left before you joined them. She was stubborn, he said finally. Impossibly stubborn. Once she decided something was right, you couldn't move her off it with dynamite. A ghost of something that might have once been a smile. Grew up back east. Wealthy family. Could have married a banker. Spent her life at charity dinners wearing gloves that never touched real work. He shook his head. Instead she came out here because she thought she could actually change something. Did she? Yes. No hesitation this time. She built a shelter for women who'd been trafficked through here. Gave them somewhere to land. The ring started leaning on her, trying to scare her off. She didn't scare. No, Sterling said. She didn't. Ren looked at the photograph a long moment. Sounds like someone I know, she said quietly. Sterling glanced at her. You remind me of her sometimes, he admitted. Not in looks. He gestured, vague, searching for the word. In the way you don't back down. The way you look at something monstrous and decide to fight it anyway instead of running. I'm not noble like she was, Ren said. I'm just angry. So was she, Sterling said. People think anger's a sin. Sometimes it's the only sane response left to an insane world. A pause. Charlotte was furious, every day, right up until the end. She just hid it better than most. They stood there while in silence neither one of them minded. Then something in Sterling's chest went cold, and still, all at once, the way a held breath goes cold right before you realize you've forgotten to let it out. Wait here, he said. Ren frowned. What? Just wait. He crossed the study to a cabinet in the corner. Locked. He hadn't opened it in 3 years, not since the week after the funeral, when he'd shoved everything of Charlotte's investigation into it and turned the key, and told himself he'd go through it properly once the grief settled down enough to let him think straight. The grief had never settled down enough, so the cabinet had just stayed locked. 3 years. His hands weren't steady on the key. Inside, papers. A journal, her handwriting cramped and urgent in the later pages. Nothing like the careful looping script from when they were first married. Freight manifests she'd copied out by hand. Notes on shipping routes. And near the back, a single loose page. A sketch. Charlotte had drawn it herself. He remembered now. Remembered her at this very desk. Candle burned low, sketching something she'd seen and couldn't shake. A circle. Crossed through with 2 jagged lines. Sterling stood very still, holding that page, and felt the floor of his understanding shift under him like ground giving way, over a mine shaft nobody'd bothered marking. Sterling, Ren's voice, behind him, careful. What is it? He turned, held the page out, didn't trust his own voice yet to explain it. Ren looked, her breath caught. That's... I know, Sterling said. That's the brand. Her hand went to her shoulder without thinking, the way it always did now, when something touched too close to the wound. That's exactly... I know, Sterling said again, quieter this time, because saying it twice didn't make it easier to hold. Ren looked up at him, and whatever question had been building behind her eyes, she didn't ask it out loud. She didn't need to. They were both thinking the same thing. The same organization that had branded her, buried her brother in an unmarked grave somewhere in those hills. That same ring had put Charlotte Ashworth in a ravine 3 years ago, and called it an accident, and Marshal Duke Halloran had helped them do it, and Sterling Ashworth had spent 3 years grieving a woman, whose death he could have, should have, understood a great deal sooner, if he'd only had the nerve to open one locked cabinet. He hadn't, until now, which meant every wasted day, since Charlotte died, was a day the Copperhead Ring had spent growing bigger, reaching further, finding some other man's wife, some other woman's brother, and doing to them exactly what they'd done to Ren, to Charlotte, to Levi Callaway, in a hole in the ground Sterling was going to find, if it took him the rest of his life. Sterling set the page down on the desk, very carefully, like it might shatter. 3 years, he said. His voice had gone rough. 3 years I let this sit locked in a drawer, because I couldn't stand to look at it. And the whole time, Sterling, Ren's hand found his arm. Not gentle exactly, firm. The grip of someone who understood exactly what this kind of guilt felt like, because she was drowning in her own version of it every single day. You didn't know. I should have looked sooner. And I should have fought harder in that basement, Ren said. And my brother should have kept his mouth shut in that saloon and let a man put his hands on me, and none of us did any of the things we should have done, because none of us knew what was coming, until it already had us by the throat. Her voice hardened. That's not on you. That's on them. Sterling looked at her. Really looked, maybe for the first time since he'd pulled her out of that storeroom. He saw not a wounded stranger he'd taken in out of decency, but someone standing in the exact same fire he was standing in, just from a different direction. Equal stakes, he said low. Equal stakes, Ren said back. Outside, the last of the daylight was draining out of the valley, turning the grass the color of old blood, the way it did every evening whether anyone was grieving or not. The land didn't care what had happened inside this house tonight. It never had. But Sterling Ashworth stood in his study, with his dead wife's sketch on the desk, and a living, furious woman's hand on his arm, and understood, finally, that the war he'd been fighting alone in the dark for 3 years had just found him a second soldier. And it had found her the same way it had found him, by taking something neither of them was ever going to get back. Gideon Marsh arrived at Larkspur on a gray gelding that looked older than the war. He didn't knock, didn't call out, just walked into the yard leading the horse by its bridle, one eye clouded white, the other fixed dead ahead on the ranch house like he'd been staring at it in his mind for 2 years, before his boots ever caught up. Sterling met him on the porch steps. Heard you're looking for men, Gideon said. No greeting first. Just that. Depends what you're offering. My daughter. Gideon's voice didn't crack. Hadn't cracked in a long time, probably. Grief that old wears itself smooth, like river rock. Copperhead Ring took her 2 years back. 10 years old. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Never found her. Never will. Sterling didn't say sorry. Didn't say anything that cheap. What can you do? Anything with iron, guns, chains, doors that need opening or shutting. Gideon's good. I finally moved off the house. Settled on Sterling instead. Just point me at something that needs breaking. 2 days after that, Nell Sharp showed up. 40-something, lean as a fence rail, missing 2 fingers on her left hand, the stumps gone smooth, and pink with old scar tissue. Eyes that never quite stopped moving, scanning doorways, windows, exits, the way a person's eyes only learn to move after they've needed an exit and didn't have one. "Heard you're looking to blow something up," she said, before Sterling had even finished crossing the yard toward her. "Several things," Sterling said. Nell grinned. It wasn't a friendly grin. It was the grin of someone who'd found, at long last, a use for a very specific and very dangerous kind of grief. "Then I'm in." She'd rigged explosives for the Union Army, she told them later, sitting at the long table in the bunkhouse, with a whiskey she hadn't touched yet. Her husband had gotten caught skimming from a Copperhead opium shipment. They'd crucified him, literally, on his own barn door. She said it the way you'd report weather. Then she picked up the whiskey and drank the whole thing in one go. After that, they came in ones and twos, the way water finds a crack in stone and just keeps finding it. Jonah Pratt, a drifter with a burned-out farm behind him, and nothing much ahead of him, who said he'd watched the Ring torch his fields, because they wanted the water rights underneath. Quiet man, good with a rifle, kept mostly to himself, which nobody thought twice about because half the people arriving at Larkspur those weeks kept mostly to themselves. Ruth Bellamy, 26 years old, though she carried herself like someone twice that, knife scars laddering up one forearm in neat, deliberate lines. Sold into the Ring at 15. Escaped at 19. For years of freedom hadn't done much to soften the flat, watchful way she looked at every man who walked into a room, sizing him up before he'd said a word. Amos Crow, a tracker who didn't explain why he wanted the Ring gone, and nobody asked twice because his silence had a weight to it that made questions feel small and unnecessary. His skill with a rifle spoke plenty on its own. They weren't soldiers. They weren't heroes either, not the storybook kind. They were survivors, the chewed up and the spat out. People the Copperhead Ring had ground down and thrown away, certain, dead certain, that broken things stayed broken. Except they hadn't stayed broken. And now they wanted blood. Sterling gave them what they needed. Weapons from his own armory. Horses from his own stables. A bunkhouse set well back from the main house where they could plan without eyes on them. Money, not much, because throwing money at grief had never once fixed anything, but enough. Food, shelter, purpose. "You're building an army?" Agnes said one morning, watching through the kitchen window, as Gideon and Jonah ran drills in the south pasture, rifles cracking against the cold air. "I'm building a reckoning," Sterling said. Agnes set a cup of coffee in front of him. Strong, black, the kind that could strip paint. "You know this could ruin you," she said. "Everything you've built. If people find out you're harboring whatever these folks are, funding an attack on what most of the territory thinks is a legitimate cattle operation. Let them think what they want." Agnes studied him a long moment. "Charlotte would be proud," she said finally. Sterling didn't answer. He just watched his unlikely army drill in the frost-burned grass and thought about promises and debts and how sometimes the two were the same thing wearing different names. 6 weeks after Sterling found her dying in Abner Farr's storeroom, Ren stood in front of the mirror in the guest room and barely recognized the woman looking back. The swelling was gone. The bruises had faded, from black to a sick yellow-green to nothing at all. The brand on her shoulder had healed into a raised, permanent scar, sharp-edged, unmistakable. Agnes had told her early on that it might soften with time. Ren knew better. Some marks didn't soften. They just stopped hurting quite as much to look at. She was stronger, too. First week, she could barely cross the room without gripping something. By the 4th week, she was riding again. Slow, careful, teeth gritted through the ribs that still complained. By the 6th, she could outshoot half the men training in that south pasture. Revenge, it turned out, made for excellent physical therapy. There was a knock. "Come in," Ren called. Sterling stepped inside, carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. "Thought you might want this." He set it on the bed, unwrapped it slow. A gun belt, a revolver, not fancy, but the kind of weapon you could trust with your life because it had clearly already kept someone else's. And beneath it, a coat. Brown leather, worn soft at the elbows, bone buttons. Ren's breath caught. Where'd you get this? Found it out at Abner's place when I went back to see to things properly. It was in the back room with you. A pause. Guessing it belonged to your brother. Ren picked the coat up, with hands that weren't steady. It still smelled like him. Tobacco. Would smoke. The cheap soap he'd always used and complained about and bought anyway because it was cheap. For one unbearable second she was back in their camp, watching Levi laugh at some stupid joke he'd made up himself, hands gesturing wild, while he talked about the life they were going to build once they hit the mining camps. Then it passed, the way it always did, leaving her standing in a stranger's guest room holding a dead man's coat. "Thank you," she whispered. Sterling nodded. "We're meeting tonight. Final planning session if you're ready." "I'm ready." She put the coat on. It fit like it had been made for her instead of him. Fit like armor. "Let's end this." The bunkhouse was crowded that night. 11 people counting Sterling and Ren. Not an army. Barely a militia. It would have to be enough. Sterling had spread maps across the long table, hand-drawn, annotated in his own careful script, marking every detail Ren could remember about the ring's holdings. The main lodge, the bunkhouses, the corrals, and underneath it all, the tunnels, because that was the part nobody in this room could unsee, once they'd heard it described. A whole second level, dug straight into the hillside, disguised beneath what looked, from the road, like any other cattle operation. But before any of that, before the maps, before the plan, there was something else Sterling needed to tell them. He'd found it 3 nights back. Gone looking through his father's old papers for a different reason entirely, trying to remember which lawyer in the capital had handled the original Larkspur land grant, in case he needed him for something related to all this, and instead he'd found a deed. A deed to a parcel of land 15 miles north. Signed by his father. Sold 30 years back to a buyer whose name meant nothing to Sterling at the time he first read it. Except the parcel number matched. Matched the exact stretch of hillside where Ren said the ring kept its prisoners. His own father's land. Sterling hadn't slept the night he found that. Because his father had never talked about that sale. Never once, in all the years Sterling worked this ranch beside him, learning the business, learning the deeds, learning which handshakes meant something, and which ones didn't, his father had never once mentioned selling off 1,500 acres to a man named Josiah Thorne. Ezra's father. Sterling had sat with that name a long time before he brought it to the table tonight. "There's something you all should know," he said now in front of the whole room. "Before we go any further," he told them. The deed. The name. The 30-year-old sale nobody in his family had ever spoken of. The room went quiet. "You're saying," Nell said slowly, "that your own daddy sold Ezra Thorne's father the land they built this whole operation on?" "I'm saying I don't know yet what I'm saying," Sterling admitted. "I'm saying my father's name is on a deed connected to the place where they're keeping people in cages. And I don't know if that makes this family's sins bigger than I ever wanted to believe, or if it's just an old man selling off land he didn't want 30 years before any of this ever happened." "Does it matter which?" Ruth asked. Quiet, not unkind. Sterling looked at her a long moment. "It matters to me," he said, "because if my family's money built the ground this evil grew out of, then burning it down isn't just Charlotte's debt I'm paying. It's mine too, older than I knew." Nobody argued that. Nobody needed to. "All right," Ren said, breaking the silence, tapping the map to bring them back. "Whoever's land it started on. Here's where it stands now." She walked them through it. The main lodge. The guards, 2 at the front gate, 1 by the barn most evenings. The tunnel entrance, hidden behind the storage shed. The cells cut into the rock below, and beyond them, deeper still, whatever room it was, where Ezra Thorne kept his ledgers and his trophies, and somewhere in all of it, an unmarked grave with her brother's name attached to nothing but dirt. "How many men?" Sterling asked. "Counted maybe 20 when I was there, but they rotate. Some are just hired hands who don't know what's underneath their own bunkhouse. Others," she stopped, steadied herself. "Others are true believers. Silas Crane's crew. They enjoy the work." "Transport days?" Sterling asked. Every 2 weeks they move people. Wagons disguised as supply runs. Take them to the depot at Coldwater Junction. From there they go east. Her jaw tightened. I don't know where exactly. Ezra never said in front of me. Sterling's pen went still on the page. Coldwater Junction. That was his freight line. His contracts. His name on the manifests that ran through that depot every single week. Ren, he said very carefully. Whose wagons? She looked at him, and something in her face shifted because she was doing the same math he was, arriving at the same terrible number. I heard them talking once, she said slowly, about how smooth it all ran, how nobody ever inspects an Ashworth shipment too close, because an Ashworth shipment's never given anybody reason to look twice. The room had gone very still. They're using my wagons, Sterling said, flat, like the words themselves weighed too much to say any other way. My contracts. My name. You didn't know, Ren said. That's not the point. Sterling stood, paced 2 steps, stopped like his own legs didn't know where to carry him with news like that sitting in his chest. Every freight contract I've signed the past 3 years. Every wagon that's rolled out of Coldwater with my brand on the side. I've been the reason nobody looks twice. His voice cracked just slightly on the last word. I've been funding them, this whole time, without knowing it, without wanting it, but funding them all the same. Did Charlotte know? Ren asked, quiet. I don't know, Sterling said, which was somehow worse than any answer he could have given. Maybe, if she was already investigating them by the time she died, maybe she'd already worked that part out too and never got the chance to tell me. He stood at the window a long moment, stars coming up cold and clean over the valley, indifferent to every single thing happening in this room. We end this, he said finally, whatever it costs. I don't care if I lose every contract I hold, every dollar to my name. We end this. Good, Ren said, because I'm not stopping until every one of them is dead. 3 days later, Sterling rode into Millhaven alone, which was a risk, a calculated one, but a risk all the same, the kind that had Agnes nearly throwing a skillet at him when he announced the plan at breakfast that morning. You go marching into that town by yourself, she said, and you might as well pin a target to your own back. I've got connections there, Sterling said, legitimate ones, men who owe me favors and don't ask the questions I don't want asked. And if the wrong man sees you first? Sterling didn't have a good answer for that. So he didn't offer one. He just finished his coffee, kissed nobody's cheek, because there was nobody left to kiss, and rode out. Millhaven sprawled along both sides of a muddy main street, buildings held up more by habit than by any real structural conviction. A silver strike had built the place 15 years back, boomed 3 years, then settled into the slow, grinding decline every played-out mining town eventually settles into, leaving behind exactly the kind of population that has nowhere better to go and enough saloons to keep them from minding too much. The marshal's office sat at the north end of the street. Squat brick building, bars on the windows, a flagpole out front that hadn't flown anything in years. Sterling didn't go near it. Marshal Duke Halloran was Copperhead through, and walking into that office would be about as subtle as announcing his intentions with a brass band. Instead, Sterling headed for the land office, squeezed narrow between a barbershop and a boarding house that leaned a little too far to the left. Inside, a clerk named Homer Teague sat behind a desk buried under ledgers and survey maps. 60 years old, nearsighted behind thick spectacles. 35 years working the Territorial Land Office, and every single one of those years had made him exactly the kind of nervous, careful man who owed Sterling Ashworth a favor, and knew it. Homer looked up. Recognition dawned. Then, right behind it, nervousness. Mr. Ashworth. He stood, so fast he knocked a stack of surveys onto the floor. Wasn't expecting. That is, I didn't know you were coming into town. Relax, Homer. Sterling shut the door behind him. I'm not here to collect. I need information. Homer's shoulders dropped an inch. Of course. Anything. What do you need? Freight manifests. Wagons moving through Coldwater Junction. Next week. I want to know who's shipping, where it's headed. Homer's face went pale. Mr. Ashworth, those records are supposed to stay confidential. Homer. Sterling didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. Something in the flatness of it made the clerk flinch anyway. I'm not asking for state secrets. I'm asking about shipping records for a depot that runs on my money and my contracts. You can help me, or I can ride to the Capitol and file a formal inquiry which will take weeks and involve a great many public questions about how business gets conducted out here in Millhaven. A pause. Or, Sterling said, you spend 10 minutes pulling files, and we both walk away happy. Homer swallowed hard. Then he nodded and disappeared into the back. Sterling stood at the window while he waited. Watched two cowhands stumble out of the broken spur, midday drunk already. Watched a woman sweep a boardwalk that didn't need sweeping, just to have something to do with her hands. Normal life, people going about their business, never once suspecting that beneath the surface of this shabby, sun-bleached town, human beings were being bought and sold like cattle. Homer came back carrying a leather folder stuffed thick with paper. These are every manifest filed for Coldwater Junction the next 10 days, he said. Mr. Ashworth, if anyone finds out I showed you these. Nobody's going to find out, Sterling said. He took the folder, flipped it open. Most of it was exactly what it looked like. Timber, mining equipment, feed. Then, buried in the middle of the stack, a manifest, dated 4 days out, filed under a name Sterling had never once heard in 20 years of running freight through that depot. Silver Pine Livestock Company. Cargo listed as cattle and feed. Destination, Millbrook Station, 300 miles east. Silver Pine Livestock didn't exist. Sterling knew every legitimate outfit working this territory. He'd never once heard that name, which meant it was a shell. A paper company invented for exactly one purpose, moving freight without ever inviting a second glance. This one, Sterling said, tapping it. Who filed it? Homer leaned in, squinted at the signature. That'd be, that's Harold Finch, freight agent. Works mostly for, he stopped himself. For who, Homer? Homer's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. For the Thorn operation. Up in the hills. Sterling's jaw went tight. How many wagons? Manifest says 4. Heavy load, based on the weight estimates. For wagons. Enough to hold 20, maybe 30 people if they were packed in tight. Ren had said the ring moved prisoners every 2 weeks. This was it. Thank you, Homer. Sterling closed the folder, handed it back. You've been a great help. Homer's hands were shaking. Please, be careful. The Thorn brothers, they're not people a man crosses lightly. I've seen what happens to folks who get in their way. So have I, Sterling said. He turned to leave, paused at the door. Homer, if anyone asks, I was never here. Homer nodded, miserable. Never here. Sterling stepped back, onto the street, and nearly walked straight into Marshal Duke Halloran. The marshal was a big man, running to fat now in his 50s, handlebar mustache, badge catching the noon light like it still meant something. 2 guns, both well kept. Eyes flat and empty in the particular way of a man who stopped caring about right and wrong a very long time ago and never once missed it. Sterling Ashworth. Halloran's voice was thick with false warmth. Long way from Larkspur. What brings you to our little town? Business, Sterling said, even. Reviewing some freight contracts. Freight contracts. Halloran's smile didn't reach his eyes. Funny. I heard your contracts have been having some trouble lately. Missing shipments. Damaged goods. Real shame. I manage. Halloran stepped closer. Close enough Sterling could smell the whiskey riding on his breath at noon on a Tuesday. You know, Sterling, you're a smart man. Successful. It'd be a real shame if something happened to disrupt all that success. A pause, calculated to land soft, as a threat could land, while still being deniable. Accidents happen out here on the frontier, even to rich men. Sterling held his gaze. Is that a threat, Marshal? That's advice, Halloran said. From someone who knows how things work around here. You stick to your ranch, your cattle, your money. Leave the law enforcing to me. A beat. Everyone stays happy that way. I'll keep that in mind, Sterling said. He pushed past, walked to his horse. Every muscle in his body pulled tight, with the effort of not turning around and putting a bullet through the corrupt lawman's skull right there in the street. That would come later. Right now, he had information, and information for the moment was worth more than revenge. He rode out of Millhaven without looking back. That night, Sterling gathered everyone in the bunkhouse and laid the manifest flat on the table. For wagons, he said. Silver Pine Livestock Company, which doesn't exist, departing Coldwater Junction in 4 days, headed east to Millbrook Station. He tapped the paper. That's our target. Nell leaned in, studying the route. Coldwater's out in the open. No cover. Flat grassland for miles. We hit them there, we're exposed. We don't hit them at the junction, Ren said. She traced a line on the map. We hit them here. Broken Mesa Canyon. Only route from the junction to Millbrook. That doesn't add 2 full days to the trip. Narrow walls. Cover. One way through. Gideon whistled low. A bottleneck. They'll be trapped. Exactly, Ren said. We take the ridge. Wait for the wagons to enter. Block both ends. Nowhere for them to run. And the prisoners? Ruth asked. If there's a fight, they're caught in the middle of it. That's why we move fast, Sterling said. Moment we've got control, we open those wagons. Get every one of them out. No hesitation. No delays. Jonah scratched his jaw. Quiet the way he always was. And the ranch itself? While we're hitting the canyon, Ezra and his people are still up in those hills. That's my job, Ren said. I go in the night before, 'cause enough chaos to unlock the cells and cripple their ammunition stores. By the time they understand what's happening, we're already gone. You'll need a diversion, Amos said. Quiet, thoughtful. Something to pull the guards off the tunnels. Fire, Nell said, already there before he'd finished the thought. I can rig it in the barn. Slow burn. Gives Ren time to get in position before it goes up. Sterling looked around the table. Everyone clear? Nods. Grim. Determined. They spent the next 3 hours hammering out the rest of it. Who took the canyon? Who hit the ranch? Signals. Fallback points if it all went sideways. By the time they finished, it was past midnight. One by one, people drifted off to sleep, exhausted, wired, the particular kind of tired that comes right before something enormous. Ren stayed, staring at the map, memorizing every line like her life depended on it, because in 4 days it might. She felt Sterling's presence before she heard him. He moved quiet for a big man. Can't sleep? He asked. Not yet. She traced the route from the ranch to Coldwater Junction, with one finger over and over, like repetition might wear it smooth enough to walk without stumbling. Sterling, if this doesn't work, if I don't make it out, don't. His voice came sharper than he meant it to. Don't talk like that. I have to. She turned to face him. If I don't make it, I need you to promise me something. My brother's buried somewhere on that ranch. Unmarked, probably. If you get the chance. I'll find him, Sterling said. I'll bury him properly. Promise. Ren nodded. Her throat had gone tight. Thank you. They stood there in the lamplight a moment. 2 people bound by grief and fury, and a promise each of them had made to burn the world down, if that's what justice ended up costing. 2 days before the planned strike, everything went to pieces. Started small. Sterling noticed it first, the way Jonah Pratt had started slipping away in the evenings, gone 20 minutes, 30, always with some quiet excuse about checking the horses, or walking off a cramp in his leg. Sterling didn't say anything at first, because a man was allowed his own quiet, because grief made people restless in all kinds of ways, and Jonah had lost a farm, a family, everything a man builds his whole life expecting to keep. A little restlessness didn't mean anything, except it kept happening. Same time most nights. Same direction, toward the tree line, away from the bunkhouse, away from everyone. Which was when Amos Crow, who noticed things nobody else in this outfit had trained themselves to notice, came and found Sterling in the study, late after the house had gone dark. "Followed him tonight," Amos said. No preamble. Sterling set down his pen. "And he met a rider. Out past the north fence. Didn't get close enough to hear words. Got close enough to see hands change something small between them." Sterling's stomach dropped. "Money, or a letter," Amos said. "Couldn't tell which. Didn't matter which. What mattered was the horse the rider was on." "What about it?" "Copperhead brand," Amos said. "Burned right into the shoulder. Same as the mark on Miss Callaway's arm." Sterling sat very still. Because if this was true, and Amos Crow did not say things that weren't true, had never once in 6 weeks said a single word, Sterling had needed to double back and check. Then somebody at this table, somebody who'd eaten Agnes's cooking and drilled in that south pasture and sat around this very map not 12 hours ago nodding along with the plan, had been feeding every piece of it straight back to Ezra Thorne. Which meant the ring already knew. Which meant 4 days from now might already be too late. Which meant Sterling needed to move now, tonight, before whatever head start they'd had evaporated entirely. "Get Ren," he said. "Get Nell. Quiet. Don't wake the others yet." They gathered in the study within the quarter hour. Ren's face, when Sterling told her, went through something complicated, shock, then fury, then a cold, focused stillness that scared him a little, if he was honest with himself. "Jonah," she said, flat. "I trained beside that man for 6 weeks. I know. I taught him how to reload faster. I know, Ren." She pressed her palms flat against the desk. Breathed once, slow, like she was forcing her own body to calm down whether it wanted to or not. "So what do we do?" she said. "Confront him? Kill him where he stands? If we tip our hand now," Nell said quiet, "he runs. Or worse, he warns Ezra we're onto him, and Ezra changes everything about the plan we've been building against for 2 weeks." Sterling was already thinking 3 steps ahead, the way he'd learned to think about freight contracts and land deeds and every other complicated thing that had ever crossed his desk. "We let him think he's still trusted," Sterling said. "One more day. We feed him something false, a detail about the plan that isn't true. If Ezra moves against that false detail, we'll know for certain, and we'll know exactly how deep this goes." "And if he doesn't take the bait?" Ren asked. "Then maybe I'm wrong about him," Sterling said. "But I don't think I am." He wasn't wrong. By morning, word came back through Homer Teague, passed along nervous and fast, the way a man passes along something he desperately doesn't want connected to his own name. The transport out of Coldwater Junction had been moved up. Not 4 days. Tomorrow. At dawn. Which could only mean one thing. Ezra Thorne knew something was coming. Knew enough to panic. Knew enough to push his own schedule up rather than risk whatever Sterling Ashworth's little army had planned for the date everyone had been told. Which meant Jonah Pratt had told him. Which meant the false detail Sterling had planted, a lie about which route the ambush would take, had gone straight up the line and come straight back down as proof. Sterling stood in the yard at dawn, the whole camp gathering around him in various states of half-dressed alarm, and felt something in his chest go hard, and cold and absolutely certain. "They moved the transport," he said. "Tomorrow, not 4 days from now." "That's not enough time," Ruth said. "We haven't scouted the canyon properly." "Haven't. We don't have a choice," Sterling said. He looked across the yard, found Jonah Pratt standing near the corral fence, arms crossed, face carefully blank in a way that Sterling now understood for exactly what it was. He walked toward him, slow, deliberate, the whole camp going quiet behind him, sensing something was about to happen even if they didn't yet know what. "Jonah," Sterling said, "walk with me." Jonah's eyes flickered, just slightly, just enough, toward the tree line, toward the north fence, toward the direction a man runs when he spent 2 weeks pretending to be something he isn't. Sure, Jonah said. His voice came out too even, too careful. How much did they pay you? Sterling asked, quiet enough that only Jonah could hear it. Jonah went very still. I don't know what you're. The rider at the north fence, Sterling said. The Copperhead brand on his horse. Amos saw the whole thing. Jonah followed you 2 nights running. A beat. So I'll ask you again. How much did they pay you to burn down every single person in this camp who trusted you? Jonah's jaw worked. For a moment Sterling thought he might actually deny it, might actually stand there and lie straight to his face the way he'd been lying for weeks. Then something in him just collapsed. They found my sister, Jonah said, voice cracking wide open all at once, like a dam that had been holding back a great deal more water than anyone realized. 2 years ago, alive. Ezra Thorne's men have her somewhere east. He told me if I fed him what your camp was planning, he'd let her go. Send her home. His eyes were wet now, desperate. You don't know what that's like. Having someone you love held over your head like that. Having somebody promise you the one thing you want most if you just betray everyone who took you in, Sterling finished. Cold. Jonah didn't answer. Didn't need to. Behind them, Ren had come up close enough to hear all of it. Her face was unreadable, but her hand had gone to the gun at her hip, not drawing it, not yet, just resting there, the way a person's hand rests on the one thing that might make sense of an unbearable moment. Is she even alive? Ren asked. Quiet. Your sister. Or is that just one more lie he fed you to keep you useful? Jonah's face crumpled. I don't know, he admitted. I don't know anymore. Sterling looked at this man, this broken, desperate, grieving man who'd sold out an entire camp of people just as broken and desperate as he was, chasing the exact same impossible hope every single one of them was chasing. The hope that somewhere out there, the person you'd lost might still be findable, might still be savable. It didn't excuse him, but it made him suddenly unbearably human. You're going to help us, Sterling said. Right now. You're going to tell me everything you told them, every last detail, and then you're going to decide, standing right here in this yard, whether you want to spend what's left of your life trying to make this right, or whether you'd rather I hand you over to the very people you sold us to. Jonah looked at him, something breaking further behind his eyes, and then slowly rebuilding into something that looked almost like resolve. I'll tell you everything, he said, and then I'm going with you, tomorrow. Whatever it takes. That's not up to you to decide alone, Ren said, sharp. Not anymore. I know, Jonah said, quiet, broken. I know that now. Sterling stood there a long moment, weighing a decision that had no clean answer, the way most decisions worth making never do. You ride with us tomorrow, he said finally. In the open, where Amos can watch you every step of the way. You get one chance to prove you meant that. One. Jonah nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't ask for more than that. It was, Sterling thought, probably more mercy than the man deserved. But mercy had never once been about deserving. Charlotte had taught him that once, a long time ago, in a conversation he hadn't understood the weight of, until this exact moment, standing in a cold yard with a traitor and a countdown neither one of them could stop now. The transport left Coldwater Junction at dawn, which gave them 1 night. Not 4 days of careful preparation, not the scouted terrain and rehearsed signals they'd planned for. 1 night, Nell worked through what remained of it by lamplight, mixing powders with hands that didn't shake despite everything riding on them getting this exactly right. Gideon sharpened every blade in the camp until they could split hairs, because a man who couldn't trust a gun to fire could at least trust a knife to cut. Ren sat alone a while in the dark, her brother's coat around her shoulders, running through every detail of the ranch layout one more time. The guards, the tunnel, the cells, the room with the names burned into the wall that she hadn't told anyone about yet, because some things needed carrying alone a little longer before you could put them down. Sterling found her there, near the corral, staring north toward hills she couldn't see in the dark, but knew by heart now regardless. Ready? He asked. Terrified, Ren said, honest, but that's good. Keeps a person sharp. Sterling leaned against the fence beside her. Looked, for a moment, like a man carrying considerably more weight than his broad shoulders usually let on. "I keep thinking about Charlotte," he said, unprompted. "About the last conversation we ever had. She was packing a bag, getting ready to ride the evidence into town. I told her it was too dangerous. Told her to wait, let me handle it instead." His voice roughened. "She looked at me and said, 'Sterling, you're good at making money, and you're good at building things. But you're not good at seeing people. I see them. I see what they're suffering, and I can't look away.'" "She was right," Ren said, quiet. "I know." Sterling's throat worked. 3 years I tried taking this ring down from a distance, throwing money at it, hiring men, working through channels that turned out to be as rotten as the thing I was trying to fix. He looked over at her. "Tomorrow I finally do it the way she would have. Hands dirty. No more distance." "Then don't get yourself killed proving it," Ren said. "Because I intend to walk out of that canyon on my own 2 feet tomorrow, and I would very much prefer not to carry your death on top of everything else I'm already carrying." Sterling almost smiled. It was small, sad, but genuine. "Deal," he said. Overhead, the stars kept turning indifferent, the way they always had, and always would, whether or not the handful of broken, furious people standing beneath them made it, through what was coming at dawn. Somewhere north, in the hills, Ezra Thorne's wagons were being loaded in the dark, cargo that had once been people now crammed, into cages built to hold cattle. And somewhere south, in a canyon neither side had fully scouted, 7 souls and 1 traitor trying to earn his way back to being something other than a traitor were about to collide with an empire that had never once, in 8 years, been made to answer for anything it had done. Tomorrow would decide which of them was wrong about how that collision ended. Dawn broke over broken mesa the color of an old bruise, purple going yellow at the edges, which felt right, Sterling thought, lying flat against the canyon rim, with his rifle warm under his hands. Because everything about this whole business had been one long bruise, spreading wider by the day, and today they were finally going to lance it. Ren lay 20 feet to his right, still, focused, her brother's coat pulled tight against the morning chill. Below them, the canyon floor sat quiet, red rock walls rising 50 feet on either side, narrow enough that 4 wagons could barely pass, through single file. A kill box if you knew how to use it. Nell knew how to use it. She'd worked through the night packing charges at both ends of the pass, and now she crouched behind a boulder near the western wall, hands steady despite everything riding on this exact moment. "There," Sterling said low, "dust on the horizon, then shapes. Wagons, 1, 2, 3, 4, canvas covered, pulled by mules, riders flanking on either side. The Copperhead transport. Positions." Ren breathed down the line. Sterling sighted along his rifle, counted riders. 9 that he could see. Could be more hidden in the wagon beds themselves. The lead wagon rolled into the canyon. Then the second, third, fourth. Nell waited, because timing mattered more than nerve right now, and she had both. She raised her hand, brought it down. The world came apart. Charges at both ends of the pass went off together, a roar that seemed to shake the sky loose from its moorings, burying the only 2 ways out under tons of falling rock. The mules screamed and reared, panicked, and there was nowhere left for any of it to go. "Now," Sterling said. Gunfire opened up from both rims at once. Methodical, brutal. The Copperhead riders returned fire, but they were trapped at the bottom of a canyon, with shooters above them on every side, and it wasn't a fight so much as it was an ending that had been coming for 8 years and finally arrived. It lasted 3 minutes. When the last echo faded, 9 men lay on the canyon floor. Some dead, some close enough it hardly mattered. Sterling stood on legs that felt looser than they should have. Started down the slope. Ren reached the first wagon before him, pulled back the canvas. Cages, built into the wagon bed like something out of a nightmare somebody had woken up from only to find it real. Women mostly, a handful of men. all of them staring out with the particular hollow look of people who'd stopped expecting anything good to happen to them ever again. "It's all right," Ren said, voice cracking despite herself. "We're getting you out." The locks were cheap, shot off easy. One by one, the cage doors swung wide, and one by one, people who'd been certain this morning would end in a train car heading east instead stumbled out into open air and sunlight and something that might eventually become hope. 23 of them in total. Sterling stood among the wreckage, dead riders, panicked mules, freed prisoners weeping in each other's arms, and felt something in his chest that wasn't triumph. Not exactly. It was closer to grief wearing triumph's coat. "We take the documents," he said, once the shock had settled enough for anyone to hear him. "Manifests, ledgers, anything with names or routes on it. This is proof. The kind even a bought judge can't make disappear." "And the ranch?" Ruth asked. "Ezra, Wade, Silas Crane, they're still up there." Sterling looked north, toward hills he'd been staring at in his sleep for weeks now. "We finish it," he said. "That's suicide," Gideon said. Flat, not arguing so much as stating a fact that needed stating out loud before anyone committed to it. "They'll know we're coming after this. Fortified. Waiting." "Probably," Ren agreed. "But if we don't finish them now, they rebuild somewhere else. New route, new names bought and paid for. And in 6 months we're standing in another canyon just like this one, except this time they'll already know exactly how we fight." Nobody argued that. Nell was already thinking 3 steps ahead, the way she'd learned to during the war. "There's a faster way in than crawling through some drainage pipe," she said. "Ezra's holding an auction tonight. Word's been moving, through the ring for a week, buyers coming in, from 3 territories, meeting at the main lodge to bid on what's left in the pipeline, before word of this canyon reaches him." Sterling's jaw tightened. "An auction. For people," Ren said. Her voice had gone very quiet, very still, the kind of stillness that scared him more than shouting would have. "If buyers are expected," Sterling said slowly, "then strangers walking through that front gate won't draw a second look. Not tonight." "You want to walk in the front door," Ruth said, "dressed as a buyer." "I want to walk in the front door," Sterling said, "as exactly the kind of rich, well-connected man Ezra Thorne would be thrilled to do business with, which, God help me, I already am." It wasn't a good plan. But then, none of the plans had been good. Not since the night Sterling rode out to collect a rifle, and found a dying woman in a storeroom instead. Somewhere along the way, good plans had stopped being an option available to any of them. They buried the dead riders in a shared grave, because leaving bodies out to rot would draw attention nobody could afford. And Gideon said a few words, over it that weren't quite prayer, just an acknowledgement, that death was death, even for men who'd earned every ounce of theirs. The freed prisoners rode north under Ruth and Amos's escort, heading for Larkspur, and whatever Agnes could offer them there. The rest of them, Sterling, Ren, Nell, Gideon, Jonah, turned toward the hills, toward the ranch, toward the end of this one way or the other. The Thorne Ranch sat exactly where Ren remembered it. Timber and stone, smoke curling from the chimney, corrals full of horses like any other cattle spread in the territory. You'd never know, looking at it, from the road, that beneath the ordinary surface of it, something monstrous had been running for 8 straight years. By dusk, wagons were arriving. Buyers, dressed well, faces Sterling didn't recognize, though he suspected some of them belonged to names he'd have recognized plenty well, from a ledger somewhere. He'd traded his own coat for something finer. Borrowed jewelry from a drawer he hadn't opened in 3 years, because a man playing the part of a wealthy buyer needed to look the part all the way through, down to the cufflinks. Ren rode beside him, hair pinned up, a shawl covering the scar on her shoulder, that no amount of fine clothing could ever fully explain away, if the wrong person looked too close. "You don't have to come in with me," Sterling said, low, as they approached the gate. "Try and stop me," Ren said. They walked through the front gate together. Nobody blinked, because that was the terrible genius of it. Sterling thought, evil this well-funded didn't hide in shadows anymore. It walked in the front door wearing good boots and better manners, and everyone standing guard had been trained to wave it right through. Inside, the main hall had been decked out like something from a nightmare wearing a ballroom's clothes. Long tables, good whiskey, men in fine coats laughing over glasses of it, waiting for the evening's business to begin. And at the head of it all, Ezra Thorne. He was younger than Sterling had pictured, somehow. Maybe 50. Gray at the temples, same as Sterling himself, dressed better than most men in this territory ever managed, with the kind of easy, practiced smile that men learn only after they've spent years convincing themselves their own cruelty is simply good business sense. "Mr. Ashworth," Ezra said, when Sterling was introduced by a name that wasn't quite his own. "I confess, I didn't expect Larkspur's owner at one of my little gatherings." "Man hears things," Sterling said, easy. "Got curious." "Curiosity," Ezra said, "is an expensive habit out here." "So's ignorance," Sterling said. "I find curiosity pays better in the long run." Ezra laughed, genuine or close enough to it. "I like you already," he said, which was, Sterling thought, exactly the problem with men like Ezra Thorne. They could be charming, could be witty, could stand in a room full of caged human beings and discuss the weather like decent company. It made them so much harder to hate cleanly. Ren stayed close, through the evening, watching, cataloging every guard position, every exit, every detail she'd need once the real business of the night began. Sterling made small talk with men whose names would end up in a federal indictment inside the year, and every laugh he forced out felt like swallowing glass. Then, near midnight, Ezra pulled him aside. "Walk with me," he said. "I want to show you something, since you've come all this way." Sterling's pulse spiked, because this was either the moment the whole plan fell apart, or the moment it finally worked. He went anyway. Ezra led him down a back hallway, through a door disguised as a pantry, downstairs cut straight into the hillside rock. Into the tunnels. The cells were mostly empty tonight, inventory for the evening's auction already brought up top. Waiting in a holding room, Sterling refused to let himself look at too closely, because looking too closely right now would have broken something in him he needed to keep intact a little longer. "You're wondering why I'm showing you this," Ezra said. "Man would be a fool not to wonder." Ezra stopped at a door near the end of the passage. Opened it. Inside, a room Sterling recognized instantly, from Ren's description weeks ago. Names, burned into the wood. Dozens of them. A memorial kept by killers the way hunters keep trophies. "You know what this is?" Ezra asked. "A room full of dead people's names," Sterling said, voice flat. "A ledger," Ezra corrected. "Every business needs one." He ran a hand along the wall, almost gentle. "My father bought land from yours, 30 years back. This exact ground, some of it, everything underneath our feet right now. Paid what your father asked for it or believed he had." Sterling went very still. "Except the note your father wrote him," Ezra went on. "Wasn't really a sale. It was a debt dressed up as one. Interest stacked on interest, climbing faster than an honest man could ever climb out from under it. My father spent 20 years working ground he'd been told was his, and died still owing more than the day he put his name on that paper." Sterling's jaw tightened. "I know about the deed." "Do you?" Ezra's voice had gone soft, almost curious. "Then you know exactly what kind of man wrote that note. And when I was old enough to understand what had been done to him, I made myself a promise that I would never again be the man forced to pay. I would only ever be the man other men paid." He gestured at the burned names on the wall. "Everyone in this room learned that lesson from somebody like your father one way or another. I simply learned it best." "You're telling me this like it excuses what you've built," Sterling said, quiet, furious. "Like being cheated once gives you the right to cheat 100 others out of everything they have." "I'm telling you," Ezra said, "because you asked me to show you something, and I wanted you to understand exactly what kind of debt you're standing in the middle of tonight. Your family's debt, not just mine." Sterling looked at the wall, at Levi Callaway's name halfway down, burned into wood like it was nothing. like a person could be reduced to nothing. My father sold that land, Sterling said low. 30 years ago, on paper he probably never once thought about again. Whatever it cost your father, and I believe that cost was real, my father's been dead 11 years. He can't answer for it. No, Ezra agreed. But you can. I intend to, Sterling said. Something in his voice must have carried more than he meant it to, because Ezra's eyes narrowed, just slightly, studying him now with the sharp, sudden attention of a man who's just realized he might have made an error somewhere in the last 5 minutes. That's an odd thing to say, Ezra said slowly. For a man here to buy. The silence that followed felt like standing at the top of Broken Mesa Canyon all over again, right before the charges went off. I'm not here to buy anything, Sterling said. He drew his revolver. Ezra didn't reach for a weapon. Didn't need to. A shout, somewhere above them, and Silas Crane's voice cracked down the stairwell, followed fast by boots. Boss! Ren appeared in the doorway behind them, gun already drawn, having heard exactly enough of that conversation through the thin wood to know precisely how this needed to end. Nobody move, she said. Silas Crane stopped dead at the bottom of the stairs. Recognition crossed his face, slow, then sudden, then something close to fear, because the last time he'd seen this particular woman, he'd assumed she was dying in a back room 300 miles away. You, he said. Me, Ren said. Ezra's composure, remarkably, held. Well, he said, almost admiring. The branded bird comes home to roost. You killed my brother, Ren said. Her voice didn't shake. Down here, in these tunnels, made me watch. I remember, Ezra said, simply. Do you remember his name? Ezra hesitated. Just slightly. Say it, Ren said. Silence. You burned it into that wall, Ren said. Like it was nothing, like he was nothing. So say it, right now. Levi, Ezra said finally. Quiet. Levi Callaway, Ren said. My brother had a name. He had a whole life. And you turned him into a mark on a wall like he was inventory. Her gun hand had gone perfectly, terribly steady. I came down here to kill you. Then do it, Ezra said, almost gentle, almost curious about which choice she'd make. Ren's finger tightened on the trigger, then stopped, because behind her, Sterling's voice cut, through the tunnel, low and urgent. Ren. She didn't look at him, didn't lower the gun. He deserves to die, she said. He does, Sterling agreed. But if you kill him here, tonight, in this basement, the world never learns what he built. Never learns the names in his ledgers upstairs, or the judges he's bought, or the marshals on his payroll in 6 different territories. He dies quiet, and everything he built keeps operating under some other man's name by next spring. A breath. Kill him now, and this ends with you as the one who pulled the trigger. Let him live, and it ends with a courtroom and a rope, and every single person he ever bought exposed alongside him. Ren's hand shook, just slightly. You want me to let him live, she said. After everything. I want you to choose which kind of justice matters more to you, Sterling said. The kind that ends in this room tonight, or the kind that ends his whole empire permanently in front of the entire territory. Silence stretched, long enough that Silas Crane, still frozen at the bottom of the stairs, seemed to understand his own fate was hanging on whatever Ren decided next. If I let you live, Ren said finally to Ezra, it's not mercy. Understand that. It's a worse punishment than a bullet. You're going to sit in a courtroom while every person you ever hurt stands up and says your name out loud. And then you're going to hang anyway, just slower, with everyone watching. Ezra's smile flickered. For the first time all night, something like real fear crossed behind his eyes. You'd let the law finish what you started, he said. The law's about to become something it hasn't been around here in 8 years, Ren said. Honest. She didn't lower her gun, but she didn't fire it either. Tie him, Sterling said. Both of them. Nell and Gideon materialized in the doorway behind Ren, having followed the noise down from the party above, and within minutes Ezra Thorne and Silas Crane stood bound in the same tunnel where they'd once bound so many others. Wade Thorne, they found upstairs an hour later, hiding behind a wine cellar door. Offering no fight at all once he understood his brother was already taken. By dawn, Federal Marshal Sterling had quietly arranged weeks earlier. Men Governor Ainsworth himself had vouched for, honest ones, rare as they were, arrived to take custody of all three. The ranch burned anyway. Not by design. A lantern, knocked loose in the chaos of the arrest, caught the old dry timber, and by the time anyone thought to fight it, the whole lodge was already lost. Sterling stood at the edge of the tree line and watched it go up, orange against the gray morning sky, and felt something in his own chest go quiet at last. Not peaceful exactly, but quiet. 3 weeks later, federal marshals rode into Millhaven and took Marshal Duke Halloran. From his own office in broad daylight, in front of half the town he'd spent a decade pretending to protect. Sterling was there when they did it, had asked to be, and Governor Ainsworth's men hadn't argued. Halloran didn't struggle, didn't posture, not this time, not with 2 federal marshals and a dozen witnesses crowding the boardwalk. He just stood there, while they read the charges, something in his big frame finally caving in on itself, like a building, whose foundation had been rotten for years, and had simply run out of ability to pretend otherwise. "You knew," Sterling said, quiet, just for Halloran. "The night Charlotte brought you that evidence. You knew exactly what you were handing Ezra Thorne when you wrote it out to him yourself." Halloran didn't deny it. Not anymore. There wasn't any percentage left in denying it. "She trusted the badge," he said. Rough. "Not me. The badge." A long breath. "I told myself that made it easier. Told myself that for 3 years. She died in a ravine," Sterling said. 6 miles from my porch, because you picked a payday over a promise you never even made her, but should have kept anyway." "I know what I did," Halloran said. "Say her name." Halloran's jaw worked. "Charlotte Ashworth," he said finally. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was, Sterling thought, the first honest thing he'd ever heard the man say. The trials took the better part of a year. Sterling testified twice, once laying out, in plain and careful terms, exactly how Halloran had funneled Charlotte's evidence straight back to the ring that killed her, and once against Ezra Thorne himself, whose lawyers tried every trick available to men, with money and no shame left to spend it on. Ren testified more times than that. Each time, the defense attorneys tried to break her down in the witness box, called her vindictive, unstable, a woman chasing vengeance dressed up as justice. Each time, she answered every question in the same flat, steady voice, until even the lawyers paid to discredit her looked uncomfortable doing it. She never cried on that stand. Not once. Halloran got 15 years. Silas Crane stood trial that same season for the murders at Abner Farr's post, and for what he'd done to Ren and to countless others in those tunnels. The jury took 11 minutes to convict him, and he was hanged before the year was out. Wade Thorne, who'd never had his brother's stomach for cruelty, only his brother's willingness to profit from it, took a plea and 12 years upstate. Ezra Thorne, once the full weight of his ledgers came out in open court, names of judges, senators' aides, freight companies across 6 states, got the noose, after all, exactly as Ren had promised him in that tunnel, except slower and with the whole territory watching. The newspapers called it the trial of the decade. A journalist named Adeline Frost wrote a series that ran in 3 states and helped push through new anti-corruption laws Governor Ainsworth had been trying to pass for a decade without traction. Through all of it, Sterling kept his promise. He funded safe houses, paid for lawyers, provided protection when threats came, and they did come more than once. His fortune took a real beating, some contracts canceled outright, some business partners quietly stepping away, afraid of the scandal sticking to them too. He didn't seem to mind. One evening, nearly a year after the ranch burned, Ren found him in the study, standing in front of Charlotte's photograph the way she'd caught him doing more times than either of them ever mentioned out loud. "Talking to her again?" Ren asked. "Always," Sterling said, "though I think I'm finally telling her things she'd actually want to hear. 3 safe houses running now. A new law on the books that'll make it harder for the next Ezra Thorne to buy his way clear. He paused. The 1,500 acres my father sold off 30 years ago is back under this family's name. Only this time it's a shelter standing on it, not a debt. She'd be proud, Ren said. Maybe. Sterling's smile came sad, but genuine. Or maybe she'd be frustrated it took me this long to get here. Spring came the way it always does, indifferent to whatever a person has survived to see it arrive. The freed prisoners scattered slowly, over the following months, back into lives that had been waiting for them, or lives they had to build entirely from scratch. Some stayed on at Larkspur, helping Agnes run what had quietly become less a cattle operation, and more a refuge for people, with nowhere else standing ready to take them in. Ruth left for California, word came back, joining another effort out there fighting the exact same fight in a different territory. Nell disappeared one morning, without a word, leaving only a note pinned to Sterling's desk. Gone to blow up something else. Don't wait supper. It was so entirely, perfectly Nell that Sterling actually laughed out loud, alone in his study, for the first time in longer than he could remember. And Ren herself, she stayed. Not because she had nowhere left to go. Because finally she had found something worth staying for. One morning in late spring, Ren walked out to the small hill north of the ranch house, the one Agnes always said caught the sunrise best, carrying a young plum sapling wrapped carefully in burlap. Levi's grave sat there, quiet under a plain granite marker. She'd chosen the words herself months back, when they finally recovered what little remained of him, from an unmarked patch of ground on land that no longer belonged to anyone who wished him harm. He stood up when it mattered. She dug a hole beside the stone, packed the young tree in carefully, roots and all, the way Agnes had shown her. Probably wouldn't survive. The soil out here ran poor. The hillside stood exposed to every wind that came through. But maybe, with luck and stubbornness, it would take hold anyway. I'm staying, Levi, she told the stone. Going to help Sterling run this place. Help people who went through what we went through. A breath. It's not the life we planned back then. But it's the life I've got now. I think you'd understand that. A shadow fell across the grave. Ren turned to find one of the women they'd freed, from the wagons, that morning at Broken Mesa. Margaret, gray-haired, steady now in a way she hadn't been able to manage for months, after her rescue. Didn't mean to intrude, Margaret said. Just wanted to say, what you did that day freeing us. It mattered. It still matters. She looked toward the grave marker. Your brother, whatever kind of man he was, I think he'd be proud of you. You didn't know him, Ren said. Not unkind. No, Margaret agreed. But I know you. And anybody who raised somebody brave enough to walk into that hell for strangers, well, that person must have been something worth knowing. After Margaret left, Ren sat by the grave while longer, one hand resting on the young plum tree. Sterling found her there an hour later, walking up the hill, with his hair fully gray now at both temples, not just one, the years finally catching all the way up to a face that had earned every line of them honestly. Agnes says there's a new arrival, he said. A woman who escaped a trafficking operation 2 counties over. Needs somewhere safe while the paperwork and the healing both get underway. I know. I'm coming. He looked down at the young tree, roots freshly settled into hard ground. Charlotte would have liked this, he said quietly. Yes, Ren agreed. She would have. They stood there together a moment, looking out over Larkspur, no longer just a wealthy man's cattle ranch, but something that might actually last, something built at last on purpose instead of accident, on giving instead of taking. The wind picked up, shook a few early blossoms loose from the young plum tree, scattering them across the grave like something close to a blessing. And in that quiet moment, Ren understood at last what Agnes had tried to tell her, all those months ago, in a kitchen that felt like 100 years past now. Anger was a tool, not a home. You used it to tear down what needed tearing down. But after the tearing came the building. And building took a different kind of courage altogether, the courage to hope, to trust, to believe that broken things, given enough time and enough stubborn care, could learn to mend. The brand on her shoulder would never fade completely. Some memories never lost their sharp edges, no matter how many years wore past them. But she had learned, finally, to carry them without being crushed under their weight. Down in the yard, the bell rang for the midday meal. Another new arrival would be there, frightened and hurting, needing food and shelter, and the particular kind of help that money alone could never quite provide. The work would continue. It always did. But for now, Ren Callaway stood beneath her brother's tree, beside the man, who had helped her build something worth living for out of the wreckage of everything she'd lost, and let herself, at last, be at peace. Not because everything had been fixed. It never fully would be, but because she had finally learned that peace was never really the absence of pain. It was the presence, at long last, of purpose.